That night, under golden chandeliers and flashing cameras, a billionaire's wife made the worst mistake of her life. With one arrogant move, she poured red wine on a black CEO in front of the world, and seconds later, her family's $5 billion empire began to burn. The ballroom at the Lexington Grand Hotel sparkled like a kingdom of power. Politicians, movie stars, and billionaires filled the hall, each one pretending to be more important than the next. And in the middle of it all stood Victoria Langford, the queen of New York's high society, beautiful, proud, and used to getting whatever she wanted. Beside her was her husband, Edward Langford, heir to Langford Enterprises, a man who had inherited everything but earned nothing. Their smiles were flawless, their charm rehearsed, and their arrogance unmatched. But across the room stood someone who didn't need approval. Darius Cole, the man they whispered about. The man who had risen from the streets of Chicago to become one of America's most powerful CEOs. His company, Cole Industries, had changed the tech world, and now he was about to sign a massive partnership deal with the Langfords. Everyone in the room respected him. Everyone except Victoria. She couldn't stand how much attention he was getting. How people, even in her circle, looked at him with admiration. In her mind, success belonged to her kind. Old money, old names. People like Darius? They were guests in her world. When Darius approached with his quiet confidence, she felt a wave of irritation she couldn't explain. He didn't look impressed by her diamonds or her attitude. He looked through her. Mr. Langford, Mrs. Langford, Darius greeted with a firm, calm tone. It's an honor to finally meet you both. Edward smiled politely. The honor's ours, Mr. Cole. I've heard a lot about you. Victoria tilted her head, pretending to be interested. Yes, we've heard quite the story. From car washes to corporate towers, isn't that right? Darius didn't flinch. That's right, he said. Hard work pays off when people underestimate you. Her smirk faltered for just a second, but she recovered fast. She lifted her glass of red wine, swirling it slowly. Well, I hope this little partnership works out. Though, I must say, not everyone from humble beginnings fits in this world. Edward's eyes widened. Victoria. But before he could finish, she turned to face Darius fully, her voice carrying across the room. Tell me, Mr. Cole, do you really think a man like you belongs here? And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she tipped her glass forward, wine spilling across his chest, staining his black suit deep crimson. The room froze. Gasps echoed. Cameras clicked. Someone dropped a drink. Edward's face turned pale. Victoria, what the hell did you just do? She laughed lightly, pretending it was all a joke. Relax, darling. I'm sure he's used to a little mess. Darius stood perfectly still. The wine dripped from his jacket, one slow drop at a time. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He just looked at her, calm, unreadable, powerful. Then, with quiet precision, he picked up a napkin, wiped his hand, and said softly, You're right, Mrs. Langford. I've dealt with worse messes before, and I always clean them up. He turned and walked away, not in anger, but in control. The kind of control that made everyone in the room step aside as he passed. Victoria laughed nervously, trying to save face. He'll be fine, she said, waving her hand. People are too sensitive these days. But as Darius left the ballroom, his assistant, Jordan, caught up to him outside. Sir, that was humiliating. Do you want me to issue a statement? Darius shook his head. No, the world saw what happened. I don't need to say a thing. Then what do we do? Jordan asked. Darius's voice was quiet, but every word carried steel. We let the Langfords see what happens when you pour wine on a man who built himself from nothing. He stepped into his car, eyes fixed on the city skyline. They think I'm angry, he murmured. But I'm patient, and patience is far more dangerous. That night, as Victoria and Edward returned home, they were already the talk of the internet. By morning, every major news outlet had the story. Billionaire's wife pours wine on black CEO during gala. Racial insult sparks outrage in New York's elite circles. Edward slammed his phone on the table. Do you realize what you've done? Victoria rolled her eyes. Oh please, the media loves drama. It'll blow over. But it wouldn't. Because while she brushed it off, Darius Cole was already moving pieces behind the scenes. Quietly. Precisely. By dawn, 3 major companies had withdrawn their proposals with Langford Enterprises. The reason? Reputation concerns. By noon, Investors started pulling out. Stocks dropped. Partners refused calls. And by the end of the day, one name was everywhere: Darius Cole. He hadn't said a word publicly. He didn't have to. His silence was louder than any press conference. The Langfords didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. Darius wasn't done. He was only getting started. As he stood in his office that evening, the city lights glowing behind him, Darius looked down at a photo of his mother, a woman who had raised him with nothing but pride and faith. He whispered softly, "They tried to humiliate me in front of the world, Mom. Now, they'll learn what real loss feels like." He placed the photo down, straightened his tie, and smiled faintly. The game had begun. The next morning, the Langford mansion looked like a storm had passed through. Edward was pacing the living room, phone in hand, his voice sharp and panicked. "What do you mean the investors are pulling out? We signed those agreements weeks ago," he shouted. On the other end, his financial advisor hesitated. "Sir, the board is concerned. The gala incident went viral. There's a boycott trending online. People are calling for sponsors to cut ties with Langford Enterprises." Edward clenched his jaw over a spilled drink. But it wasn't just a drink anymore. Overnight, the video had hit every major platform. Millions of people had seen Victoria pour wine on Darius Cole. Comments flooded in: outrage, disgust, anger. The world had chosen sides, and none of them were on hers. Victoria entered the room, wearing sunglasses and sipping coffee like nothing had happened. "You're overreacting, Edward. People forget things in 24 hours. That's how the internet works." Edward turned toward her, eyes cold. "This isn't a social scandal, Victoria. This is business. Do you have any idea who Darius Cole is?" She shrugged. "A man who got lucky." "No," Edward snapped. "He's a man who built a company worth twice as much as ours. A man who has friends in every major boardroom in this country. And now, thanks to you, he's our enemy." For the first time, Victoria's confident smile faded. "You think he'd actually destroy us?" Edward interrupted. "If I were him, I'd already be planning it." And he was right. Across the city, Darius sat in his glass-walled office, calm as ever. His assistant, Jordan, entered with a tablet. "Sir, here's the report you requested. 3 of their partners withdrew overnight. Their PR team is scrambling. The company lost 8% in market value this morning." Darius nodded slowly. "Good, but we're not finished." He leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp. "Reach out to the Langford's biggest supplier, Hendricks Holdings. Tell them Cole Industries is ready to offer them double their contract value if they end their deal with Langford Enterprises today." Jordan blinked. "Double, sir? That's a heavy price." Darius smiled faintly. "Reputation costs more." Within hours, Hendricks Holdings cut ties with the Langfords. Their supply chain collapsed. Factories stalled. Deliveries stopped. By evening, Edward's office looked like chaos. Phones rang nonstop. Emails poured in. His entire team was on edge. "We've lost our European partners," one executive reported. "And Hendricks just canceled our raw materials contract." Edward sank into his chair, hands on his head. "This can't be happening." Victoria stormed in, phone in hand. "I just got a message from the charity board. I've been removed from my position. Do you believe this? I've been canceled." Edward's voice rose. "You humiliated a black CEO in front of the world, Victoria. This isn't gossip. This is corporate suicide." But even as he shouted, Darius was already 2 steps ahead. That night, he attended a private dinner with the chairman of Northbridge Investments, the firm that held the largest stake in Langford Enterprises. The moment Darius entered the room, the chairman stood. "Mr. Cole, I assume this visit isn't social." Darius smiled politely. "Not at all. I'm here to discuss the Langfords." The chairman raised an eyebrow. "Their stock is dropping fast. Investors are nervous." "I can make your problem disappear," Darius said calmly. "Cole Industries is prepared to acquire your shares, quietly. Full value, no questions asked." The chairman leaned back, intrigued. "And what do you gain from this?" Darius's expression didn't change. Closure. By midnight, the deal was done. Darius had become the silent majority shareholder in Langford Enterprises, without the Langfords even knowing. The next morning, Victoria woke to another wave of news coverage. Protesters had gathered outside their company headquarters, holding signs demanding accountability. The once celebrated Langford name had turned toxic. Edward's voice cracked as he spoke on the phone with the board. "Gentlemen, please, just give us time to recover. The situation is under control. But the chairman interrupted him coldly. No, Edward. The situation is over. You're being removed as CEO, effective immediately. What? Edward stood frozen. You can't do that. It's already done. The new controlling shareholder has made the decision. Edward's heart sank. Who? The line went quiet for a moment. Then the chairman said softly, Darius Cole. Edward dropped the phone. His hands trembled. He owns us, he whispered. Across town, Darius stood by his office window, watching the sunrise. His assistant entered quietly. It's done. You now control Langford Enterprises. Darius didn't smile. He just nodded once. Send an invitation to Edward and Victoria Langford. I want them here by noon. At exactly 12 o'clock, the Langfords arrived at Cole Industries. The receptionist led them into Darius's office, a vast room of glass, steel, and silence. Darius stood at the far end, facing the window, his reflection glowing in the sunlight. Victoria forced a nervous laugh. Mr. Cole, I believe we may have started off on the wrong foot. He turned slowly, his gaze cutting through her composure. The wrong foot. You tried to humiliate me in front of the world. But here you are now, in my office, because I own everything that used to be yours. Edward tried to speak, his voice trembling. Darius, please, we can make this right. My wife made a mistake. I'll issue a public apology, anything. Darius walked toward them, calm and deliberate. Do you know what the difference is between you and me, Mr. Langford? You were born with everything. I earned everything. The problem is, people like your wife think money gives them power. But real power is what you do when someone tries to take your dignity. Victoria swallowed hard, her voice shaking. So what now? You destroy us completely. Darius's tone dropped, cold and measured. No, I don't destroy people. I let them watch themselves fall. He stepped closer, his voice low. You poured wine on me that night because you thought I didn't belong. But remember this. Every time you look in the mirror, every time you see your name in a headline, every time you lose another piece of what you built, I'll be there, quietly, watching, reminding you that respect can't be bought. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, her arrogance finally cracking. Edward reached for her hand, defeated. Darius looked at them one last time. You wanted to embarrass me in public. I just returned the favor, permanently. As they left his office, Victoria turned for one last glance. Darius stood there, still calm, still powerful, like a man who had conquered not just an empire, but his own past. And for the first time in her life, she realized she hadn't poured wine on a man that night. She'd poured it on her own future. By the next week, the Langfords' world had fallen apart. Their company shares were gone. Their employees, loyal for years, were now signing with Cole Industries. Reporters camped outside their mansion gates. What was once a symbol of power had turned into a cage of shame. Edward sat in his study, staring at a desk full of unpaid invoices and legal letters. His phone rang endlessly, banks, lawyers, and former partners all demanding answers. He picked up one call, his voice barely steady. Please, just give us time. The voice on the other end cut him off cold. Time won't fix reputation, Mr. Langford. You're a liability now. He hung up slowly, looking around at his office filled with trophies, photographs, and awards. All meaningless now. Everything he had built, gone. Upstairs, Victoria stood in front of her mirror, her reflection almost unrecognizable. The woman who once spent hours getting ready for galas now looked tired, pale, and hollow. Her phone buzzed with hundreds of messages, but not one of them was from a friend. Every event had dropped her. Charities cut ties. Fashion brands deleted photos of her from their pages. Even the women who once followed her every move had unfollowed her online, pretending they never knew her. In 1 week, she went from being admired to being avoided. That morning, Edward entered the room, holding a document. We're being evicted from the summer estate, he said quietly. Victoria turned sharply. Evicted? That's impossible. It's the bank, Edward said. They repossessed it. We're out of cash, Victoria. Every account's been frozen. She stared at him, her voice trembling. This can't be happening. Darius wouldn't go this far. Edward's eyes darkened. You humiliated him in front of the entire city. You think he's just going to forgive that? She sank onto the bed, speechless. For the first time in her life, silence filled the room. No assistants, no phone calls, no cameras. Just the echo of her own choices. Across town, Darius watched the morning news from his office. The anchor's voice was steady. Langford Enterprises files for bankruptcy. Former CEO Edward Langford and wife Victoria face public backlash following the viral gala incident. Jordan, his assistant, glanced at him. "It's done, sir. You've taken everything from them." But Darius didn't smile. He just stared at the screen for a long moment. "No, Jordan," he said quietly. "I didn't take anything. They gave it away, piece by piece, when they chose arrogance over respect." He stood and walked to the window, watching the city skyline. Power means nothing without humility. That's the lesson she never learned. The next day, Edward and Victoria were forced to sell their mansion. Reporters swarmed the gates as movers carried boxes out. Cameras flashed, voices shouted questions. "Mrs. Langford, do you have a message for Darius Cole? Do you regret what you did?" Victoria covered her face, pushing through the chaos. "No comment," she shouted, but her voice broke halfway through. Inside the car, she sat in silence, staring out the window as the house disappeared behind them. "Edward," she whispered, "how did it all come to this?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Days later, they moved into a smaller home on the outskirts of the city, quiet, plain, and far from the life they once knew. For the first time in decades, Victoria had no staff, no driver, no parties. She woke up early, made her own breakfast, and faced a truth she had never confronted before. She was ordinary. One afternoon, she walked to a nearby store. As she stood in line, she noticed two women whispering behind her, their phones raised. She didn't need to hear the words. She knew. Her face was everywhere. She left quickly, her chest tight, her eyes burning. When she returned home, Edward was waiting at the table, holding a letter. "What now?" she asked softly. "It's from Darius Cole's office," he said, sliding it across the table. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single page. A company invitation to a new charity gala hosted by Cole Industries. At the bottom, one handwritten line. "Respect is earned, not poured." Darius Cole, her hands trembled. She looked at Edward, voice shaking. "He's mocking us." Edward exhaled. "No, he's teaching us." She stood, anger rising. "I'm not going." Edward looked at her, weary and broken. "You should. Maybe it's time you face what you did." That night, for hours, she sat alone, staring at that invitation. Memories of the gala haunted her, the laughter, the cameras, the look in Darius's eyes. She could still feel the weight of the wine glass in her hand, the sound of liquid hitting his suit. She'd thought she was powerful that night, but she had only proven how small she truly was. The next evening, she finally made her decision. When she entered the new gala, dressed in a simple black gown, the room went silent. Guests turned, whispering. Cameras pointed again, but this time, not in admiration. At the center of the hall stood Darius Cole, speaking with investors and media executives. When he saw her, he didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply watched her approach. Victoria took a deep breath and walked toward him. Every step felt heavier than the last. When she finally stood before him, she whispered, "Mr. Cole, I came here to say I'm sorry." The room went quiet again. Every ear turned toward them. Darius studied her for a long moment. "Sorry for what, Mrs. Langford?" Her voice cracked. "For what I did that night. For what I said. For thinking I was above you. I wasn't. I was just afraid of losing control." He nodded slowly. "Fear and pride, dangerous combination. I lost everything because of it," she said softly. "But I guess that's what it took for me to understand." For the first time, Darius's expression softened, not with forgiveness, but with understanding. He leaned closer, his voice low. "The world gives everyone a chance to rise, Mrs. Langford. You just have to learn when to stop looking down." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "You've already won, Mr. Cole. You didn't need to come this far." Darius's tone stayed calm. "It was never about winning. It was about reminding people like you that respect matters more than money." She lowered her head. "I know that now." He looked at her for a moment longer, then turned to leave. "Then my work here is done." As Darius walked away, the cameras captured every second. This time, not of humiliation, but of humility. And for the first time since that night, Victoria didn't feel powerful or proud. She just felt human. After that night, the city slowly moved on. The headlines faded. The outrage cooled. But something deeper remained. Something that couldn't be seen on screens or captured in photos. Victoria had changed. She no longer looked at life the same way. Her pride, once a shield, had shattered. She spent most days quietly volunteering at a local shelter, keeping her name out of sight, learning what real humility felt like. Edward tried rebuilding what was left of his business, but doors that once opened easily were now closed. Their old friends didn't return calls. Invitations stopped coming. The Langford name had become a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, Darius Cole continued to rise. His company had doubled in value. New partnerships, new ventures, new headlines. Every step of his success made the world remember who he was and what he stood for. But inside, he wasn't celebrating. Because while everyone saw the victory, they didn't see the silence behind it. Late one evening, Darius sat alone in his penthouse, looking out over the city lights. The skyline sparkled, but his eyes were distant, drawn somewhere far from the present. On the table beside him lay an old photograph, faded and cracked at the corners. It was of a small boy standing beside his mother, both smiling outside a broken-down apartment building in Chicago. Her name was Elaine Cole, a woman who worked 3 jobs, saved every dollar, and told her son every night, "Don't let anyone make you feel small, baby. You were born to stand tall." When Darius was just 13, his mother had been humiliated by a wealthy employer, a man who laughed at her for cleaning his floors and told her she'd never belong among real people. She had come home crying that night. Darius remembered holding her hands, promising, "One day, I'll show them who we are." He had kept that promise. But as he stared at the photo, he realized something. Showing them wasn't the same as healing. Jordan, his assistant, knocked gently on the door. "Sir? You okay?" Darius didn't look away from the photo. "Jordan, do you ever wonder what winning really means?" Jordan hesitated. "I think it means proving everyone wrong." Darius shook his head slowly. "No, it means not letting their hate turn you into them." Jordan studied him quietly. "You think you became like her?" Darius sighed. "That night, when she poured that wine on me, I saw the same look in her eyes that man once gave my mother. Arrogance, disgust, and I told myself I'd make her feel what my mother felt. But the truth is, revenge doesn't fill the hole. It just echoes louder." There was a long silence. Then Jordan said softly, "Maybe that's why she came to apologize. Maybe she finally saw what you were trying to teach her." Darius nodded faintly. "Maybe." But the story between them wasn't over yet. A few weeks later, as Darius prepared for a foundation event supporting underprivileged students, his team introduced him to one of the scholarship candidates, a bright young woman named Amelia Langford. Yes, their daughter. When she walked into the room, Darius froze for a second. She was in her early 20s, confident, yet humble. Her resemblance to Victoria was unmistakable, but her eyes carried something different: kindness. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, extending her hand. "It's an honor to meet you." He took her hand slowly. "Langford?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, sir. But please, don't hold that against me." He studied her carefully. "You know who I am." "I do," she said. "And I know what my mother did. I'm not here to excuse her. I'm here because I want to be better." For the first time in years, Darius smiled. Not out of pride, but out of recognition. "What are you studying?" "Business and ethics," she said. "I want to help rebuild communities that people like my family ignored." He paused. "Why apply for my scholarship?" She met his eyes without hesitation. "Because your story inspires me. You built everything from nothing. You changed what success means for people like me. And because I want to learn from someone who knows what dignity really looks like." Darius was silent for a moment. Her words carried no arrogance, no hidden motive, just honesty. "Sit down," he said finally. For the next hour, they talked. About ambition, about failure, about respect. And for the first time, Darius saw something that eased the bitterness in his heart. A reflection of who he might have been if someone had treated him differently when he was young. When the meeting ended, Amelia stood and said, "I don't expect forgiveness for what my family did. But if I can work for your foundation, maybe I can earn a little of it." Darius looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "You start Monday." As she left the room, Jordan entered quietly. "Sir, that was the Langford's daughter?" "Yes," Darius said. "And you hired her?" Darius looked at the door she'd just walked through. Sometimes, the best way to end a cycle is to teach the next generation how not to repeat it. That night, Darius returned to his penthouse and stood by the window once again. He picked up the old photo of his mother and smiled faintly. You were right, Mom, he whispered. Standing tall isn't about stepping on others. It's about lifting those who fell. Weeks passed. Amelia worked hard, earning respect from everyone around her. She didn't hide her last name. She faced it, owned it, and slowly began to rebuild what her parents had broken. One afternoon, she found herself sitting across from Darius, discussing a new scholarship expansion. You know, she said with a small smile, my mom's been volunteering lately. She told me about the shelter she works at. She said she finally understands what kindness feels like when it's real. Darius looked up. She told you that. Amelia nodded. She asked me to thank you. She said losing everything gave her back her humanity. Darius was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, tell her she doesn't owe me thanks. Just keep doing the work. As Amelia left his office that day, Darius watched her go, with the calm, quiet satisfaction of a man who had finally found peace. For the first time in years, he didn't feel anger. He felt freedom. Months had passed since Darius hired Amelia Langford. Under his mentorship, she had become one of the brightest young minds in the foundation. Her ideas were fresh, her compassion real, and her humility rare. People began to notice her name again, but this time, it wasn't tied to scandal. It was tied to redemption. One afternoon, as Darius prepared for a major gala honoring the foundation's success, Amelia approached his office. Mr. Cole, she said softly, there's someone here who wants to speak with you. I think you should see her. Darius looked up from his desk. The tone in her voice said enough. Outside his glass door stood Victoria Langford. No designer gown, no diamond jewelry, just a plain dress and eyes that carried the weight of everything she'd lost. For a moment, time stood still. The same woman who had once humiliated him in front of hundreds now stood small, quiet, humbled. Amelia looked at Darius, silently asking if he wanted her to stay. He nodded gently. It's okay, Amelia. She stepped out, leaving them alone. Victoria took a shaky breath. I wasn't sure you'd agree to see me. Darius leaned back in his chair, studying her face. I wasn't sure I wanted to. There was a pause. Heavy, uncomfortable. Then, she said softly, I didn't come here for forgiveness. I came to tell you I finally understand what I did. He didn't speak. She continued. The night I poured that wine on you, I thought I was powerful. I thought money meant respect. But I was just scared. Scared of losing control. Scared of being seen as less. Her voice broke. You showed me what real power looks like. And it's not humiliation, it's restraint. You didn't destroy me, Darius. You let me destroy myself. And that's something I live with every day. For a long moment, Darius just listened. His face calm, unreadable. Finally, he said quietly, you know, for years, I dreamed of this moment. I wanted you to feel what I felt that night. But now that you're here, I realize I don't need it. Victoria blinked, tears welling up. You don't hate me? I did, he said. But hate is heavy. It keeps you chained to the past. I've carried it long enough. Her lips trembled. I don't deserve your kindness. This isn't kindness, Darius replied. It's peace. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't bitter anymore. It was human. Victoria took a deep breath. My daughter tells me you've been helping her. She says you've taught her more about life in a few months than I did in 20 years. Thank you for that. Darius nodded slightly. She's a good person. She'll go further than either of us ever did. Victoria smiled weakly. I believe that. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photograph, old and creased. This was from the gala that night. Someone sent it to me later. You were wiping wine off your jacket while everyone laughed. She paused. I keep it to remind myself who I was, and who I never want to be again. Darius looked at the photo, then back at her. Keep it, he said. You've already learned the lesson. As she turned to leave, she hesitated by the door. You know, she said softly, for what it's worth. I'm proud of what you've become. You showed the world that grace is stronger than revenge. He didn't reply, but his eyes softened. That was enough. When she left, Amelia quietly re-entered the room. That must have been hard, she said. Darius exhaled slowly. Harder than any deal I've ever made. Amelia smiled faintly. You handled it with class. He looked at her. That's what your mother taught me, without meaning to. They both laughed gently. For the first time, the past didn't hurt to remember. Later that evening, at the gala, Darius stood on stage in front of hundreds of guests. The hall glittered with light, but his voice was calm, grounded. When I started this foundation, he began, I thought it was about helping others succeed. But over time, I learned something deeper. It's about healing what success can't touch. He paused, scanning the crowd. His eyes found Amelia in the front row, smiling proudly. I came from nothing, he continued. And for years, I thought respect was something people had to give me. But the truth is, respect begins when you learn to forgive, even the ones who never apologized. The audience went silent. Every word hit deep. He ended with, true power isn't measured in dollars or deals. It's measured in dignity. And when you understand that, no one can ever take it from you. Applause filled the room. As Darius stepped off the stage, a woman approached him, older, with silver hair, wearing a modest dress. It was Victoria. She had come quietly, sitting at the back, unnoticed. She didn't say a word. She just placed her hand over her heart and nodded, tears in her eyes. Darius returned the gesture with a subtle nod of his own. No bitterness, no pride, just understanding. Outside, the city shimmered under the night sky. Darius looked up at the stars and whispered to himself, we all stumble, but some of us learn to rise higher because of it. He turned to see Amelia waiting by the car. Ready to go, Mr. Cole? She asked. He smiled. Yeah, let's get back to work. There are still more stories to rewrite. As the car pulled away, the camera would fade out slowly, the skyline behind them glowing like a promise. A story that began with humiliation ended with redemption. Not through revenge, but through grace. Because sometimes, the most powerful move is forgiveness. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps more people see stories like this. And if you believe that power means nothing without grace, then subscribe and stay with us for more stories that remind us what humanity truly means. Because every story here carries a lesson worth remembering.